Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast, episode 11. My name is Matt Wood, and this will be part 2 with Randy Caparoso, Sommelier, wine journalist, and Lodi Wine Authority. Randy goes through some more Lodi history, including its oldest Zin vineyard and what was there before, field blends in Lodi or lack thereof, white grapes and white wines, how the book came to be, and the Lodi rules farming practices. Here we go.
So I always tell people, in fact, sometimes people ask me, what would you buy if you were in a pinch? And I said, well, that has happened to me where I didn't have all these bottles around and I had to go to a store and buy something if I wanted to drink tonight, if I'm staying at a lake and all that. I go to a store and I'll tell you the truth, if I'm lucky, and usually I am, there's a Woodbridge by Robert Mondavi brand in that store because that's all over the place. But you can buy Woodbridge Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and you get really good wine. And because they're really good at it. I mean, sure, it's a 20 million or 25 million case production winery, but they're really good at doing that. And most of the fruit comes from Lodi. So it doesn't all come from Lodi, but but no, I bring people who study wine to Woodbridge to speak to their head winemaker, and we have them explain how they do it, and it's really fascinating. So if you're looking for a really good $10 Cabernet, buy one from Woodbridge. Grown mostly and produced in Lodi.
In the book, you note that Zinfandel, Cab, Chardonnay, Merlot, Pinot Gris, Petit Syrah, kind of the top 6 grapes planted in Lodi. Do you see any other grape kind of coming up, maybe not making it into the top 6, but is there something that Lodi grows in maybe smaller amounts at the moment that you think might kind of catch on?
That's a good question.
It seems like there's more and more kind of Iberian varietals planted, and I didn't know if there was something that seemed like it was under the surface.
I'll tell you right now, no, because that top 6 is it's a strong reflection of the market. People drink a lot of Pinot Grigio these days. They really like it. And Pinot Noir, people love Pinot Noir, especially since that movie came out. And then, Merlot became popular in the 90s, and Zinfandel is still useful, even though it has its ups and downs. Because after that, it's a bunch of also rants. I don't see it. In fact, if anything, I would say this. As the years go by, what we'll see more is a little more of a bunching, maybe a dozen grape varieties that are planted in good quantities, rather than outside in the top 3, which are Cabernet, Chardonnay, and now Pinot Noir. Outside of those 3, there would be more of a bunching of a whole bunch of popular varieties. And that's because you're probably seeing the same thing. People's tastes in wine are diversified. They're starting to learn and appreciate the fact that, it's not all about Cabernet or Pinot or Chardonnay. I don't know how much longer Pinot Gris, will be in terms of its popularity. Pinot Grigio, and I think there's a lot of other grapes that make a similar type of wine, which is light, dry, a little tart, that are just as good or better than that, and people are only bound to understand that. They're already drinking Sauvignon Blanc like crazy. Sauvignon Blanc, though, has been around with us since the 60s, so a lot of people think, oh, wow, that's become really popular. Saying, no, actually, it's been kind of popular since the 60s. It just never goes away. But it never... In the 60s and 70s, no one drank Chardonnay. People didn't drink Chardonnay to the mid-80s. Before that, they could care less. I used to have great Chateau Montelena, Fremont Abbey Chardonnay on my wine list in the late 70s, and nobody wanted it. I mean, it's like, this is Chateau Montelena. And they said, so give me that Venti Blanc de Blanc. I don't want this. And so the industry is funny in that way. So it does go through trends. And so I would think that Pinot Gris types would start to fade, but others might come up. So here in Lodi, there are more producers of Albarino than Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay because Albarino grows really well here in Lodi. It's not a Mediterranean grape; it's an Atlantic Ocean grape from Rias Baixas, but it grows well here. And maybe it's because Rias Baixas is right on the ocean, and so it's used to humidity and retains great acidity. And it's a cooler climate than it is on the other side of Spain, closer to the Mediterranean. Mm-hmm. But it grows so well here. And so consequently, we have more producers of Albarino here because it's easy to grow. It's just, try stopping it. It just wants to grow and grow and grow. Produce lots and lots of tiny little clusters and make beautiful fruit. And they're not even big clusters like Chardonnay. They're tiny. We have more producers of Tempranillo than Cabernet probably, and that grows well here too. And that is obviously a Mediterranean type grape. It loves warm climate. And so those are the type of grapes that we want to see more. But, all bets are off when we talk about what's going to happen in 10, 20, or 30 years because things are happening now that we couldn't envision 30 years ago. Who would envision that there would be so much Pinot Grigio in the ground? There are a lot of grape varieties out there that these regions here in California can grow. A lot of the Italian varieties, for instance, there's like dozens. Like, what are your favorite Italian ones? I mean, I think when I go to Rome, I drink Frascati. If you go to Naples, you drink, lots of Soave. And you go to Sicily or Apulia and you're growing, you're drinking wines from all those native grapes that I can't even pronounce down there. and so those, there's so much out there. And so the question is, why don't we grow? Garganega, which makes all that great Soave. Why don't we grow more Trebbiano that goes into Frascati and the answer, of course, is why not? And it's only a matter of the industry and consumers together taking that step forward together because it has to go hand in hand. Industry is not going to plant anything unless there's some kind of interest. But the funny thing is we know the interest is there because people do buy Soave. Mm-hmm. They do buy Frascati. They do buy lots of Southern French wines or wines from Germany. And they're just not domestically grown. There should have to be that jump. You kind of forget that the reason why in the 50s and 60s, people did a lot of Cabernet and Chardonnay is because the industry realized that people drink Bordeaux. They like white Burgundy. You go to a nice restaurant and you find white Burgundy. You drink Pouilly-Fuissé or Macon or Pouilly-Montrachet or Meursault. People drink that. And so the industry made a logical conclusion that if we focus on Chardonnay, we will probably be able to sell it. Same thing is with Cabernet. We know Cabernet can make good wine, and it's the grape of Bordeaux. And then for years, they couldn't do much with Pinot Noir because in the beginning, they weren't planting it in the right place. But by the time you get into the 80s, 90s, it was in the right place. It was parts of Sonoma where 20 years before, they never imagined they could ever grow grape. It's so cold. Parts of Santa Barbara where it made sense to grow Pinot Noir. So Pinot Noir had to come when they found the right place. Mm-hmm. Cabernet was more flexible. You can grow it almost anywhere except the coldest places because they did try growing it in Monterey and decided that, no, that's a mistake. And too cold.
Yeah. Green still.
But Lodi is just fine. And Paso Robles, wonderful. Lake County, Mendocino, nice. I think it's going to be inevitable that people are going to diversify and then the industry will follow suit by planting the grapes. So this afternoon at 2:00, I'm going to meet with a winery owner and grape grower, Jeff Pelagos, who owns Stampede. We're going to taste his first commercial bottling of Assyrtiko. And so it's a Greek grape. It's really hot in the islands where they grow there. It's hotter than here in Lodi. And it's not only hot, it's so windy that they can't even grow grapes in a normal way. They have to shape each individual vine into little baskets and have the clusters grow inside of it, because that's the only way they'll survive the winds and the heat. You can actually grow Assyrtiko here in a normal way, not having to worry about the wind and too much sun, and we're not even as hot. So the conclusion is we can grow Assyrtiko as well as other Greek grapes, but you start with Assyrtiko because that's like their Cabernet or Chardonnay. It's better known, so people will understand that. Once they do that, they can diversify into other Greek varieties. It doesn't matter if you never heard of it, you can't pronounce it. If it tastes good, it's going to be fine. I say the same thing for grapes like Garganega, Enzeli, or even Biancalella, or any of these grapes. Nero d'Avola is making a little impact here. And, that's one of those grapes from southern Italy. But there's going to be other ones coming up that people are going to appreciate more. We already grow Manthea here, but there's lots of other Spanish grapes that can do just as well here. Just as Garnacha and Mataro have always done well here because the climate. So that's where things have to change, though. People have to start getting away from this whole idea that wine has to be appreciated and understood or explained in terms of varietal character, because what that does is it almost forces people to think in terms of only a few varieties. And when people start thinking about wines in terms of where it's grown and how good does it reflect that area, it could, be it Willamette Valley, Umpqua Valley, Columbia Valley, Santa Rita, or Santa Maria. It doesn't matter. When people start thinking in terms of the places, then naturally they don't think it necessarily has to be from this grape or that grape. It could be from any grape. So, because what you're doing is you have to reorganize the way in which you evaluate and appreciate wine. You're not thinking in terms that it all has to be from the best grapes. It's a very primitive way of looking at things. It's, the other regions in the world don't do that way. I mean, you don't grow Cabernet Sauvignon in Veneto, or necessarily you don't grow it in Bandol, because it's not appropriate. It won't grow so well in those places. And, other wines, you grow other grapes because it's better for that place. And so that's how things will shift. The emphasis has to be on the place as opposed to the variety. And so it's a whole cultural, holistic change that has to occur for that to happen. But it will happen. It will happen because that's how, wine industries evolve. We already know that's how it evolved in the old country, and it will probably evolve here too in the United States eventually.
Yeah. What do you think the impact of the Lodi rules farming practices have had in Lodi? And
Lodi rules was very important to Lodi itself, because the growers first of all, the growers themselves came up with that.
Okay.
And they initiated the research. They got the right support that was needed for them. They brought in the scientists to help create it. And they gave it to themselves and said, we're going to do this. And they did it, for commercial reasons. They wanted to improve their product. And they also wanted to improve the environment, because, here in Lodi, the growers, they're all neighbors. And so it's really that simple. They wanted to make sure their land and their industry is sustained over generations because this is a multi-generational place. You know, most of our wineries and our grape growers are third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation people going back to the 1850s, which is like really weird for the rest of the industry. So we have a little bit longer, and so why in Lodi and less so in the other places? Because we're a farming community, and that's the way farming communities are, and that makes them conservative. You know, we're not like the Bay Area or the coast, so politically they're conservative, but at the same time, the conservatism translates into that whole idea of sustainability. They want things to last and they want things to hold the way they want it. So Lodi rules is very important to them to create it a way in which they can just check this, check that, check this, done, done, done. It was a guideline, for them to grow responsibly, serves to sustain the environment and the people, because people is part of that whole equation. So that's where it's different from, say, organic wine growing in, because there's no people part in organic. It's all about farming, which is important too. But here, how you treat your employees is important. What you do with them, because they put it in there because they realize that we can't sustain an industry unless we have people. I mean, you can't have grapevines unless someone's out there cultivating them. Last but not least, they did it in such a way where at this point right now, more than half the vineyards or acres that are certified by Lodi rules for sustainable wine growing are not even in Lodi. They're outside of Lodi.
Would you say more than half?
Yeah, more than half now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's they're in other places. There's 800 acres in Israel that's certified Lodi rules, but you have your friends in El Dorado. They're all over the Central Coast. Now, Lodi Rules is not the only sustainable program. Other people are doing the California sponsored version, which is based on Lodi Rules, as well as their SIP, which is more Central Coast based, which is very similar to Lodi Rules. But Lodi Rules is very popular because it's consistent. Now, it's evolving too, and it has to evolve. There are certain things in there I would say have to change at some point, and they're working towards it. Because people, here's the thing is, because as you know, more and more people are concerned about how their product is grown and farmed. And so the consumers are already picky, but they're going to get pickier. And so they're going to make more demands. And so Lodi rules will change, to meet the needs of the consumers, because consumers are ultimately the ones that determine everything, just like in any product. But Lodi rules started as a farmer's initiative here in Lodi. Important.
Yes.
So a McKay will have the Lodi rules certified green on that, even though this vineyard is actually farmed organically.
Okay.
So we have vineyards that are farmed organically as well as sustainably and even biodynamic, because there are some wineries that want biodynamic fruit. So if you're a farmer and they say they want biodynamic, well, that's what you're going to get. It's funny, when you look at our recent history in California, you see the same thing with whether you're talking about, Umpqua or Rogue Valley, compared to Willamette Valley, or the sub areas of Willamette, and then you start to recent history, but appreciation of Santa Lucia Highlands or Santa Rita Hills, Santa Maria Valley, because it used to be all about Napa Valley in Sonoma County in California. And so it's always a little at a time that people start to come around to the idea that these other places have interesting wines too. The big jump, I think, for us is because we're not a coastal region. We're coastal influence because we're in the delta, but we're not. We're not the same. So we have different shticks involved. We're more, even though the coastal areas are Mediterranean climates, we're very Mediterranean climate.
Yeah.
Compared to them, and that's the intellect part, which is a lot hard for a lot of people, because they think that, oh, we're not on the coast, that must mean we're a desert, and that's the hard part. And they think that, oh, you can't make a balanced wine, you can't make the wine light with lots of acidity because it's Lodi, right? Isn't it a desert? and I didn't even talk about the fact that Lodi is actually becoming better known for its white wine than its red.
You can talk about it if you want.
And it's becoming, and a lot of people don't think that. They think if you talk about white wine has to have lots of acidity and it can't be too heavy. And so how can it grow in Lodi? Well, the fact of the matter is, again, we have a moderate Mediterranean climate. If you want the grapes to be fresh, you just pick it a little earlier. It has a lot of acidity and only produces 12.5 to 13% alcohol. And voila, you have a nice, fresh, crisp Viognier, Vermentino, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Roussanne, Picpoul. You have all these varieties tasting as correct as you want it to be, yet very refreshing and light, because we actually have a climate where these grapes, these Mediterranean grapes, ripen naturally in this environment to that level. So there's no tricks. Our most famous white wine producer is a winery called Acquiesce, and that's all they do. Well, they do rosés too, made from Grenache and Cinsault, but they do all the Southern French white varieties. Not all of them, but 7 of them, lots of them. And they're light and crisp and refreshing. And they don't do a thing to the wine. It's all natural. And that's the funny thing about Lodi. Once, about 6-7 years ago, there was a contingent of a British journalist came over. A couple of them were masters of wine. One of them was Oz Clarke, very, very famous British journalist. And Clarke just came out and said, looked at the soil and the climate and said, Lodi is better for white grapes than it is for reds. And the reason why he thought that was a lot of it because he was looking at a lot of sandy loam soils. When he looks at sandy loam, he thinks, okay, you should be growing some Southern Rhone white grapes. That's just his thought process. But he made a good point. I can't agree that it's better for whites than it's reds, but it can be just as good for whites as it is for reds. And he's absolutely correct. Which is why I say you can grow Assyrtiko, and you can grow, Enzolio, you can grow Garganega, you can grow lots of different white varieties. So the market has to catch up with that. There has to be a reason for a farmer to plant this or that. So right now, there's no reason to compete with Soave to grow with those grapes. But, at some point, it'll come along. I think there's a reason to compete with the Greek varieties. Because
that should be really interesting.
Yeah, those Greek varieties, those Greek wines, sometimes they can be hard to get. And they can be expensive, too. And so we can grow Assyrtiko and sell it for $35. It could be just as good as a $50 Assyrtiko. So there you go. It's funny, though. Albarino does so well here, but you can still buy really good Albarinos from Spain for $10-12, and our Albarinos are all somewhere between 18 and 28, generally speaking. And so a little bit more expensive than Spain's, but then they have expensive Spanish ones too. So we're competing at the premium level of Spanish Albariño.
Yeah.
Now you can make a point and say, why wouldn't I drink a Lodi Albariño when I can get one from Rio Spices? Well, I have done blind tastings, and people can't tell the difference.
Really?
Yeah. Number one, Rio Spices is very complex, and so depending on the brand and where they're grown and all that kind of places, you get a whole range. And so we have actually a narrower range of Albariños. Ours tend to be on the mineral, fragrant, flowery side with a little bit of honeysuckle, a little bit of mandarin orange, whereas they can go the whole range from really lean and tart and minerally to extremely perfumey and fat and fruity and tropical. And so anyone who has any experience with Albariño, they would know that. And so when you taste ours with theirs, it's like, okay, so which one am I tasting? Is this? And we do this all the time with visitors, sommeliers, press, masters of wine. We'll do the blind tasting. Picpoul from Lodi, Picpoul from Picpoul de Panay, Albariño from Spain, Albariño from Lodi, and Carignan and Grenache. We do it all the time. And it's the whites where they have a hard time.
Okay.
And even with Sauvignon Blanc, they have a hard time. I mean, I'm talking about Sauvignon Blanc compared to a Sancerre or a Puy-Fumé. They have a hard time. Half the time, the one they say, that must be French or that must be Spanish. Half the time, it's not. It's from Lodi. And you know why, though? The number one reason why is because anyone who does blind tastings, they always have to go what they tell themselves intellectually. So what they tell themselves intellectually is Lodi is the warm region. So therefore, if I have two of the same and one is crisper and lighter, a little more pronounced acidity, that must be the European wine. And so we, being no dummies, we throw them the curves all the time, where we present our Sauvignon Blanc next to a Sancerre where ours is crisper and lighter and more minerally. Same thing for Albariño. Same thing for Viognier-based wine. Theoretically, that should be easy because Viogniers from Condoroux do tend to be fatter and richer, but still people get messed up because our Viogniers are always lighter and crisper than a Condoroux. They're never as fat, but people still think, so they even mess up on the obvious ones, comparisons. And so this is what we have to fight every day in terms of that reputation for Lodi.
It seems like there's not a lot of, well, if you could tell me, like interplanted vineyards in Lodi. You have some of these other regions that have more of kind of the field blend type style.
Well, you have to understand the history of those things because the field blends, evolved in the 1800s when, number one, they weren't sure what will work best. They knew this grape called Zinfandel works really well. But what about these other grapes? And what if the Zinfandel doesn't do that well? And so your typical Zinfandel block in a Sonoma County they'd have 8, 10, 12 different varieties in there, including white varieties, all interplanted. In that way, the idea is really, really simple. You never want to put your eggs in one basket. It really is that simple.
Yeah.
And so it sort of evolved that way and it continued. Was it necessary? I don't think so, but that's the way it happened. So here in Lodi, though, it was different because they're growing in this climate, which is more consistent. We don't have fog covers, you see. starting around this time, we hardly see any clouds. And well, it's more towards the end of May. That's when all of a sudden the sky is like clear. It's like clear sailing, no cloud cover, no fog, nothing. So that's a huge difference from the coast. And so these grapes see sun from the moment it comes up over the mountains and the moment it sinks in the Pacific. It's the sun. It's clear. There's no barriers. Hammering that point a lot, am I? But and so Zinfandel didn't need other varieties. They didn't need, the reassurance of having a little bit of Carignan, a little bit of Mataro, a little bit of whatever in there. They didn't need that because they knew that Zinfandel loves that soil, that deep, rich alluvium soil, and it loves this sun. It's all going to ripen. Not a problem.
Yeah.
And then number two, most of Lodi's history is, selling to big wineries. Yeah, like a Gallo, but in the 60s, it used to be co-ops. And the co-ops were owned by growers largely themselves. But some of the biggest when you sell to big producers, but it's true even in Sonoma, but they prefer to get homogeneous deliveries. Like, when you deliver Zinfandel to them, they don't want it to be 10% of something else. They would prefer Zinfandel. Now, I just got through telling you that Gallo used to buy most of the Zinfandel in Sonoma and Napa, and that's true. But they still would prefer. If you deliver Zinfandel, please deliver Zinfandel. Cut all this other crap out. So these vineyards evolved as closer to 100% what it's supposed to be. It's not all true. Like Stampede, most of its history is a history of neglect. So it's always had a little bit of mission and other varieties in there. Okay. So that, it's still mostly Zinfandel. It's still 90% Zinfandel, but it has other things in there. And you have to remember too, Lodi has a packing history too. Where a lot of these grapes are sold, and they still are, still packed and sold to home winemakers. And again, when you sell packs of Carignan or Zinfandel or Sansot, whatever, it has to be 100%.
Right.
They don't want a little bit of this thrown in. So that's just Lodi history.
Yeah.
And how it's grown. So we don't have the mixed block so much. That said, our oldest block of Zinfandel is a mixed block.
Oh, really? Okay.
The Jesse's Grove has a little vineyard called Royalty, and it is about 85% Zin, but the rest is Carignan, Mission, Black Prince, and Tokay.
Okay, that's the oldest Zin in Lodi.
It's the oldest. So why is it mixed? Well, they never changed it. That's all. And so it used to be bigger, but over the years, it's all been replaced by young trellis vines. But the healthiest part of the vineyard just remained the same, and that was the oldest part, right next to the big, huge grove of oak trees.
Okay.
What I mean by that, 30 acres of just oak. Because the Spanker family that founded the farm, they wanted to keep just that parcel to show what was there before they leveled everything and planted, the wheat and oats and then later on watermelons and grapes. But they kept this old part, so they could just point to it. See, this is the way it was.
Okay. Yeah, that's fun to see.
Yeah. Valley Oaks. So
yeah,
so that's all in Jesse's Grove. Yeah, and that's how you can learn about the ecology. I talk about that in the book too. Yes, Valley Oaks, need a lot of water and a deep rooting system. So it's that particular type of oak. Once you start getting into the shallower soils around this area, you see different varieties of oaks. live oaks, blue oaks, different varieties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that can grow in shallower soil or more on hillsides or whatever. But the valley oaks like this flat, deep soil. So it's very indicative of the terroir.
Mm-hmm.
And the the families that came here, so they had the benefit of seeing the natural plantings in the areas, and so that kind of told them what they could do here and what they could do there. Explains a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
99% of the Zinfandel was planted around here because that was where you get the deepest soil. You can just get the cutting and stick it in the ground. And the water table is really high. And so they can dry farm it. And because within a few years, those vines were seeing water
Mm-hmm.
all by themselves. The water table's dropped to about 60, 70 feet now, but it used to be really up to just barely 4 or 5 feet before all the dams went in,
Mm-hmm.
So, because the McCullum itself is dammed in 3 places. And so we have Pardee Dam and Comanche Dam just east of us. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the river is well controlled. And so that's what's caused the water tables to drop.
Okay.
And they're all built in the late 50s and 60s.
I was wondering if you give me some background on how the Lodi book came to be.
Oh, well, it came to be because it had to be done at some point. So it's 450 pages with over 450 photographs, most of them mine. I've been doing all this blogging, and I used to blog twice a week. I think I did that for like 5 years, but now I thought, that's too much. People are just sick of reading it. So I only do it 6 times a month.
Okay.
You get this accumulation of information, but at some point, you know what? It just makes sense to put it together. And so I hope to do a follow-up book that has it's mostly photographs because I'm a visual sort of guy. I like to look at things, and but with still some nice bits of information. So the original Lodi book that you see here, say original because there might be a follow-up, but has all the basic information that you want to see: their history, lists of all the grapes grown, and a few profiles of people here. So that's done. So the book had to be done. I guess that's the answer, because, well, every region should have books. Now, there are regions out there that are very important that don't have books about themselves. There's lots on Napa because, Napa's Napa. But, so every region should have a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a matter of each one getting it together and having one. A good friend of mine came out with one a few months before my Lodi book came out. It was on Santa Barbara. And so Santa Barbara has a nice, big, visually attractive book too. And as well it should. What about Paso Robles? What about Lake County? What about Mendocino? There's a lot of regions that don't have books.
Yeah.
Amador County. So at least we got ours.
Is there a section of it that you're particularly proud of?
Well, no. I kind of liked it all. Personally, I was really fascinated by the history.
Mm-hmm.
That shows something is real if it has a tangible history that you can put your finger on. I'm proud. I'm hoping, though, people that ever see the book or read it or go through it can put the 2 and 2 together, which I try to do, which is Lodi is a product of its own environment, of, that combination of soils and Mediterranean climate, which is why the region ended up being the most productive wine grape region in California, producing more than twice the amount of grapes of Napa and Sonoma County combined,
Mm-hmm.
more grapes than all of Washington State and Oregon State combined, plus another 25%. There's a lot of grapes here.
Yeah.
But people say, how does it happen? Well, it happens because this place is kind of ideal for growing grapes. You can grow Cabernet. You can actually grow Pinot Noir, but you can really grow really good Grenache, Zinfandel, Tempranillo, Albarino, Vermentino. They can be really good here. Because of the climate. Cabernet is actually really good here too, because Cabernet and Chardonnay are really flexible grapes. So is Sauvignon Blanc. We make light, crisp, naturally tart Sauvignon Blanc here. Why? People say, oh, how does that happen? Well, Sauvignon Blanc is pretty flexible. It grows well in Napa. It grows great in Lake County and all over Sonoma. And it really makes good wine in Amador County, for God's sake. And so it's possible to do a lot of things here. We're not a cold climate, and so we will never create a Pinot Noir close to what you can get in other places. But I still say that good Pinot Noir can be made here. I think if you put your thinking cap on, it can be really nice. You can just push the fruit and the softness and the fruitiness, but we're never going to get that balance and complexity that you can get in Santa Barbara or in Anderson Valley or places like that. Mm-hmm. We're just not cool enough for that, but you can make wonderfully fruit-filled Pinot Noir, which a lot of people drink. So the effort hasn't been there. So that explains a lot of grapes. So effort has to be made for Pinot Noir here. We actually grow a lot of Pinot Noir. There's like 12,000 acres of Pinot Noir here, but all goes into lower price wine, or it goes into wines that carry other appellations. And so there's a lot of Sonoma wineries that buy Lodi Pinot Noir. You're allowed to blend a certain amount. And so a lot of them depend upon Lodi to produce a certain amounts that they can utilize to, keep their business going. It's business here. They don't have to tell you, even though it says Sonoma Coast, they don't have to tell you that, a small percentage came from Lodi. That's where it's going. It's these 12,000 acres grown in Lodi. So,
can you tell people where they could get your book or follow your writing?
Well, if they know my name, I'm easy to find. It's called the Google.
Yep.
So, but it is on Amazon, or I have my own website. It's called Kitchen Cinco, CINCO Press, Kitchen Cinco Press, and you can buy it there. In fact, you should buy it there because Amazon makes the money from the books sold there, not me. So
buy independent.
But I put it on Amazon because it's convenient, and I would appreciate anyone buying it. So it's called the Definitive Guide, and it's everything you wanted to know about Lodi. And so there you go. And it's not going to tell you where to go, where to visit, which wineries to go to, and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have any of that crap. It's not a travel book or a destination book. I'm not going to recommend hotels, but it's a wine geek's book. It gives you all the geeky information about the region. You can read all about it. I like to think it's done in a way where anybody can read it. It's not anything dense or scientific. So, and then just hopefully people will appreciate this region. There was a guy who once did an interview, and he came out with a interview of me, and he came out with a story, and I think in the first paragraph, he says, I have the most Catholic of tastes. And it's not referring to the fact that I am a Roman Catholic, but it's referring to the fact that I tend to appreciate wines from everywhere in the world, and you can you can see it on my wine list, and where I would give southern France more space on my wine list than I would Burgundy or Bordeaux, and that should tell you something, not that I don't like Bordeaux or Burgundy. I've done wine lists with all those lists of Grand Crus and from the classic regions, but tell you the truth, it kind of bores me. It's not that I don't appreciate the wines. It's just what I mean by it bores me is I want something else. I want to appreciate different things, and so I appreciate all the regions of California. So, in my other job as editor at large of the Somm Journal, I cover other regions. I've led sommelier tours of Santa Barbara, Paso Robles, Lake County, the Sonoma Coast, and all these other places. Each place is special. So that's the whole idea, is understanding the whys behind every place. And my idea is for sommeliers to appreciate wine, they truly need to go to a place and smell the air and walk through the vineyard and smell the trees around it and get their hands in the dirt. And then when they do that, it's always the same thing. They say, wow, now I understand why the wine is like that. Because unless you've done that, all you have are wines in glasses at a table. And the only way you can appreciate the things are only in terms of themselves in that glass. So you think all Pinot Noir should be like this, all Cabernet should be like this, because that's all you have. But once you go to a place and you feel the wind and you smell the trees on the hill next to it, and then you stick your fingers into the dirt, all of a sudden you understand, oh, now I can appreciate why the wines from this place taste the way it does and why it's never going to taste like the wines from these other places. It's not going to happen because the best wines are made in the vineyard. They reflect where they're grown. You can just stick to shitty wines that are made commercially and kind of manufactured to taste this way and that, but the best wines reflect where they come from. So that's the reason why I continue to do these things with sommeliers, because I want them to have the same experience that I got when I was in the business, but I had the luxury of traveling around and looking at different places. So I met Kermit Lynch in the late 80s, and then later on he came out with his book, Adventures on the Wine Route, and then you could read all about Kermit, going all over these different parts of France and talking about the people there and the culture and the history. And then you come away with that idea that, okay, now I understand, and the whole gist of Adventures by Lynch is he wants you to appreciate every region for what it is, not for how it compares with other regions. It's really that simple. That's what I hope people can come to appreciate when they read a book about Lodi or a book about Santa Barbara or a book about any other region. Each one is different. Don't expect it to be like the others, because that's the beauty of wine, is understanding each place.
Thanks for listening to part 2 of our talk with Randy. If you happen to find yourself near Lodi, many of these wines and wineries he's mentioned in the last couple episodes are available for tasting and purchase at the Lodi Visitor Center. Some also have tasting rooms of their own. You can follow the podcast and subscribe on wherever you're listening, and also follow the Instagram at IndieWinePodcast for updates, or email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with questions comments, or feedback. Next week's episode will be with Becky Bloomfield, the president of the Contra Costa Wine Growers Association. We'll be discussing some history of this wine growing area, as well as hearing about their petition to form a Contra Costa AVA. Thanks again. Have a good one.